keep it going, because when you get old, it goes to almost zero. And you gain weight by looking at the food. So, that's the way it goes. We're working on it. Walked good last night. All right, ready to sing? It's beautiful over in the church. Come thou fount of every blessing. It goes back pretty far in history, doesn't it? Come thou fount of every blessing, to my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come. And I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus saw me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, to rescue me from danger, interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts of love. All right, great hymn. By the way, let's pause for a second on that third verse there. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God of love. If you had to write a white paper on that, how would you develop that thought? Prone to wander. Are we prone to wander? We're like sheep? Okay. Could it be said more in the absolute that in the old nature, we're going to wander? Right? Why? Because the old nature is what compared to in relationship to God or in attitude towards God?
Opposed.
Opposed. Very good. It's an enmity, right? So it's going to work itself out in one of two ways. The old nature in the Christian's life is going to work itself out in one of two ways. Either it's going to push back and be rejecting God openly, Romans chapter 1, or it is going to try and duplicate God and holiness, Romans again. Okay? Between the person who raises his fist against God, unsaved person raises his fist against God, or tries to be like God, very religious, trying to be good, the moralizer. You see those two? And so that is really open rebellion or works. And both of them are the results of the old nature. So if we really look at it closely, it's not just that I'm sort of prone to wander a little bit. Okay? It's that when I walk in the flesh, I'm in opposition to the things of the Spirit. And boy, that makes me think. And it makes me want to walk in the Spirit, because then I realize how serious it is to walk in the flesh. Okay? And it's so easy to do. You get up in the morning, stub your toe, and immediately be in the flesh, can't you? I think people expect to get awake in the morning and be in the Spirit, but I'm not sure that's a good assumption. I think we need to constantly dedicate ourselves to walking in the Spirit. Okay, here we are again for our, this is postmodern day today. And we're going to see Ravi's video that fits with that from yesterday. We're going to hear 7 reports, and we're going to hear those. And I think it might be good for us to, before we hear Ravi's conclusion on some of that, to hear my presentation on that, it would be to hear our reports first. And we don't want to intimidate you. Now, I do want to give you some. Let's go to do this. Let's back up here just one and apply this. See if we're on the screen. Okay, let's give you 2 or 3 slides, and then I'll say the majority of my report on postmodernism. I have been using for a long time the words, and this is going to help unconfuse issues, I think. Okay? Hope it unconfuses everything. And I look back now and think I should have really included this in our class last year and the year before. But from now on, I'm going to try and do a better job to include this because it may have caused some confusion. We saw Francis Schaeffer in the video saying that philosophers down through the centuries have drawn a circle, saying this is how we're going to find meaning, happiness, purpose, etc. This is the unified thinking for man. Only for another philosopher to come along and say, no, we can't find truth that way. And then proposes another way of thinking. And then you remember what Schaeffer said. There came a point in time when they decided if we couldn't find meaning and value in reason, through reason, then perhaps we can find it by, it sounds crazy, sounds, you know, you got to be kidding me, but maybe we can find reason through purpose and meaning through non-reason. Remember that? Okay? The girls can listen to me. The guys are writing this in and they can't hear a word I'm saying because men think one thing at a time. There's Trevor. He's really trying to get this. Okay. I'm just being a realist this morning. I think the girls heard every word I was saying, didn't they? Yeah, while you're writing. Wow, the way God made you is just marvelous. We need you so bad in our lives. Okay. Back to the subject. You remember Schaeffer said that here's a way of thinking, cross it out. Here's another better way of thinking, cross it out. Whether you want to use the word, and here's where I'm going to try and confuse us. There are different words to describe this process. Okay, I have used and continue to use postmodernism, the word postmodernism, to describe our culture today. I'm going to do that this morning. But Schaeffer didn't use that word. He might have mentioned it. I don't even remember him mentioning it. But he didn't use that word. He used another word. What was it? Non-reason. Non-reason. At times he used the word relativism also to describe the same concept. Rabbi Zacharias is going to use the word relativism over and over and over. They all refer to the same concept, the same movement. And in your reports, I'm sure you noticed that, because you all did a report on postmodernism, I'm sure you noticed that it's more than just a philosophical way of thinking. It had input into architecture and music, etc. And it's very, postmodernism is hard. We're handing a sheet this morning from Charm, which is a apologetic ministry, a good apologetic ministry, and I want you to check it out sometime, in which they describe postmodernism in relationship to the emerging church. And because the emerging church is, I'm going to try and show you this morning, into postmodernism, I believe. That's why I think the emerging church is dangerous. Good motivation, we'll come to that later, but I think apologetically dealing with postmodernism in an inconsistent and in a weak way. Now, back to our thought. So there are different words for this ism, or different ways to approach it. I happen to use the term postmodernism, and it may seem out of date, old-fashioned. There are just different words to use it. I'm going to use the word virtual reality postmodernism to describe what I think is happening now in a new sense. That is not the word others are using. So when you hear phrases like this, try and understand what is being said, and then just look for other people's words that they use to describe it and see that we're talking about the same thing. I believe we're living in a postmodern world. Now what I mean by that is there are people who are espousing relativism. It's the natural result of evolutionary thinking coming from the human mind. Remember what we gave the 3 words from Henry Morris? Relativistic, evolutionary, relativistic, humanism. Or you can mix those up. You can go humanistic, humanistic, relativity, and evolution. You mix those 3 together. If we were created, not by God, but were brought about by chance. Okay, chance. Remember Schaeffer talked a lot about chance, didn't he? He showed the Gage who tried to create music by chance, the artist Pollock who tried to create art by chance. Why? Because they believe the universe is the result of chance. Well, what is chance? Chance is a functioning of something that has no primary reason or cause. It has no goal. It isn't going anywhere. It didn't come from anywhere. So it's non-reason. Illogical in itself. So if you apply your evolutionary thinking, way of thinking, okay, now I'm trying to do a different terminology today, so you see we're talking about the same thing. So you don't get tired of the word postmodernism. So if you're an evolutionist and you really are consistent and you apply that to other areas of your life, like architecture, music, etc., but especially to philosophy and to religion. Why do I separate those two? In the handout we're going to give you today from Charm, they open us up by saying postmodernism is very hard to describe. It's very hard to define. Why? Because it's a theory, it's a philosophy that basically is saying there isn't any absolute truth and there's no true absolute reality. Well, if that's what it believes, how would you describe it? What literal terms would you use to describe it when it claims there isn't anything literal or absolute? Do you understand? It becomes an enigma. It becomes a conundrum in itself. And the reason it really is devastating when it comes to philosophy and religion, faith, concepts about God, the ethereal, is because it has no basis even to make a statement. And I re-quote Jacques Derrida, who said, basically, words have no meaning. Okay, I'm going to teach you my worldview this morning, and my worldview is based on the concept and is consistent with the idea that words have no meaning. How in the world am I ever going to communicate with you what I believe? Because in a nutshell, I really don't believe anything. So simply for me to say, this is what I believe, is making what? What kind of a statement? It's an absolute statement. It's a reality statement. I want you to know what I believe. When Derrida says words have no meaning, he's making a reality statement, a literal statement. He's making an absolute statement. Do you understand words have no meaning? But as soon as he says it, the letters just all fall to the ground. Because the intent of his philosophy, that thing which he's trying to describe, is that there really isn't any reality in language. There's no reality. There's no truth. There's no anything absolute around us. So all I'm left with is what you say, and I take what you say, and I deconstruct it, and I reconstruct it with I think what you said. Then the point is, come on, help me here. The point is, what did you say? Well, I'm deciding that. So when I say to you, words have no meaning, you've got to deconstruct that. Well, how would you deconstruct it? Well, you just said words have no meaning. So since they have no meaning, I don't know what he said. So I'm going to make up whatever I think he said. Now you say, Pastor Don, that is insanity. Could you live in that world?
No.
No. So in this Charm article, it mentions this. Oh, I'm sorry. Lang is a present-day Christian apologist. He says, when people say we live in a postmodern world, he says that's not true, because you can't live in a postmodern world. Well, I think it's a semantic thing. I think it's a use of words. I believe we do live in a postmodern world. In other words, a world where people are saying, this is our premise of worldview. They can't live in that world. In the world of science, technology, they can't live in that world. The only place you can really apply it is in the world of speculative sciences. I differentiate between the real sciences and speculative sciences, theoretical sciences. I gave you this early in the fall, so you should be responding pretty quick here. Give me some names of actual sciences that would be in the real world.
Biology.
Biology.
Geology.
Physiology. Is that what you said?
I said geology.
Geology.
Electrical.
Pardon?
Physics.
Physics.
Electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering. Architecture. That's the real world, isn't it? You could be a postmodern thinker and then design music, design art. To some extent, music is in the real world too. But you could design your building to show your postmodern view. And the artist, the postmodernist, remember what Schaeffer was doing, was showing you that we moved from an age of reason. The Renaissance started with that, showing man and his great humanness and beauty. And then they couldn't find real meaning and purpose in it because they didn't let it go back to God. They didn't take it back to God. The Reformers did, but the Renaissance people in the South did not. So then they decided there isn't any, then surrealism and impressionism and eventually modern art, where man is lost. Because you can't even define what man is if there's no premise, if there's no definitions you can use. This is a very hard thing to describe. And the article I'm going to hand out to you says it's very hard to define postmodernism. Of course it is. Because how can you define something that says there's no reality and no truth, no absolute truth, by using words that you are used to, are connected to what? True definitions. True definitions. That's very difficult. In the area of the real sciences, they can't live that way. It's only in the area of the theoretical sciences, like theoretical sciences.
Evolution.
Pardon?
Like origins.
I just got
Origins.
origins,
Historical science.
historical interpretation,
Philosophy.
philosophy, sociology, psychology, psychiatry, behavioral sciences. Now think about this. Have you done this? If you take the average curriculum offered to you by universities and colleges in the United States, you can take pretty quickly. Now, the real sciences are influenced, but the real sciences are, you're going to go and learn that when you take a beaker and put water in it and throw sodium in it, you're going to get this reaction. How often are you going to get that reaction? All the time. In postmodernism, not necessarily will you get the reaction all the time, because you can't count on anything being absolute. Now, make a guess in the United States, when college students go today and sign up for college, make a guess. Do college students gravitate, percentage-wise, to the actual sciences or to the theoretical sciences? They gravitate to the theoretical sciences. It's more comfortable in our culture today. Where does evolution lie?
Theoretical.
Theoretical. I believe Christianity relies on both of them. The evolutionist can't rely on the actual world. He argues from it, but he has to keep going from point to point because real science keeps proving him wrong. There are no missing links. And his whole premise is built on that at times. This is why, young people, that R&D, what's R&D?
Research and development.
Research and development. And the United States is lagging the world today in...
Research and development.
Why?
Because we have a relativistic mindset that won't allow for absolutes, which is necessary for any actual...
For interest in and motivation for actual science. Why is R&D down in the United States? Because college students aren't signing up for the actual sciences. Why not? Because we've espoused a worldview that doesn't fit. Now, how did Schaeffer say that? How did Schaeffer teach that to you? He used and showed that even though the Chinese had great science at first, and so did the Arabs in math, did they go anywhere with it? No, it had no motivation to. Whereas we came to Faraday and Pascal and Newton and others, they pursued actual science because they believed standing behind it was what? A creator God who is infinite and wise and knowledgeable and unchanging. Therefore, I can expect to study his world and expect to find what? incredible
Design and truth.
design and truth. And so where did science blossom in human culture? It came out of the Reformation. Starting with the Renaissance, but it didn't go anywhere with it, because the Renaissance would have been like the Chinese and the Arabs. They didn't connect it to God. So they never had the pure motive and incentive and desire to get into it and research it. If, you know, you did a thing the other night on that mystery thing you did, and people like mysteries because they like to be challenged to try and figure out puzzles. Can you imagine a murder mystery written by God? Would that be a challenge? Wouldn't it? Why do you shake your heads? Yes, because you know an infinite being wrote this. It's going to have no dead ends and no loose strings, and it's... Wouldn't that be a game to play that God designed? Why? Because you would expect it to be what? Unbelievable in depth and width. Well, if that world out there was created by an infinite being, I can take any part of it and study it and expect to find what?
Design, intelligence.
Expect to find intelligence and mystery and things I don't understand, and no matter how. Now, I really say this is infinite because I don't think God made the universe infinite. Why? Theoretically, we're on a deep bunny trail. Why wouldn't I expect God to create anything infinite? Because that would be God creating another something equal to, that would be unjust. So the universe is not, it's finite, isn't it? But it still carries his fingerprint. It carries the fingerprint of the infinite. You know, I give you this thought to try and help make my point. It seems to me that I'm in the middle as far as size in the universe. Now, this is going to maybe be a poor analogy, but if I take myself and go to the bigness of the universe, I see how big the universe is and the stars and how big the universe is, and it's uncomprehendable. If I take myself and put myself somewhere at the center and go to the tiny, this is a telescope, this is a microscope. If I go to the tiny, well, it wasn't too many years ago when we were taught that there were atoms. And they found there was smaller stuff than atoms. Now in the study of dimension and theory, might we expect to find there's something even smaller than the parts that we know now? I don't know. But it just seems to me that you go in one direction, you see this incredible design, the universe, and you go the other direction, you got DNA. And I shared with you that I talked to an expert at ICR and asked him a simple question. I was curious. I said, do you think that DNA, which is amazing, I mean it is amazing, isn't it? Incredible confirmation of the designer. Do you think there's possibly something even more complicated behind the concept of DNA? You go from chromosomes to DNA, you say, could it be a whole scientific realm of truth, even deeper, wider, and smaller, but more complicated behind DNA? He said, yeah, I think it's possible. So boy, we think we're pretty smart because now we know we understand DNA. Well, we don't understand DNA, but we know about DNA a little bit. What if there's a whole, chemical reactions that cause DNA and this whole links to take place? What if there's a whole science underneath DNA? Does it go on forever? I don't think so, because I don't think God created the universe infinitely. That would go against my understanding of the justice of God, and there's no other God, and he hasn't created any other God, and he won't create another God. It's impossible, theoretically, because God is the only God there is, and the singularity of God won't create another God. So start snorkeling, trying to grasp for air. But I think that carries over into the real world. Now, Schaeffer showed you through art and music and the drug culture, and he showed you by talking about the showed you videos so far. He showed you some video of Woodstock, how a whole generation found meaninglessness and purposelessness, is that a word? By logic and reason. So they threw it off and went to the area of non-reason. I could just equally substitute as to how I'm using the word in our class. They threw that away and went to postmodernism. Okay. Ravi Zacharias will talk about the same movement. He is talking about the same movement yesterday, talking to us, sharing with us, both and, either or. Both and is non-reason. Both and is from eastern part of the world is non-reason. It isn't the bus and me. Okay? When you say that the whole universe is God, pantheism, and that I'm God, everything is God, all the cells are God, all the atoms are God, and God is everything, and now God is both good and bad, and evil, and God is both cruelty and beauty at the same time. All of a sudden you've left the world of reason. You can no longer determine what is right or wrong for yourself, or what is harmful or not harmful, or what you should admire as beauty or non-beauty. How did Ravi Zacharias say it? The mountain that he talked about, where the mountain of despair, that's what it leads to, and the chicken lays an egg and we think it's good, but the chicken goes potty and is still a secretion of the chicken. And the man in the picture he was talking about, the illustration he was talking about, says, wait a minute, he rides away. Reason. The horse comes and takes him out and says, get out of there. Because these people can't tell what is for refuge, what nature designed, God designed as refuge, and what he designed as beauty. Why not? There is no definitions left anymore. There's no criteria. There's nothing, no matrix to help us decide anything once we say there is nothing as absolute truth. Okay? And that's where we are today. Now this shift, these slides that I'm putting up on the screen, liberalism. Liberalism came about a period of time, Schaeffer's circles, when man came to a reason on the steps towards postmodernism, where he began to say, the questions all previous form of tradition, reasonable, rational thought, opposed cultural norms of authority, erased the supernatural, evolution, there is no God, and the God is dead movement was a statement from that era, and there's no truth of God to know because there isn't any God. So it's what you decide God is. But it left people cold and empty. So Soren Kierkegaard and others and Karl Barth came along and said, well, Barth said it's the word when God speaks. Or this existential moment. This angst, even if it's for one philosopher that was quoted by Schaeffer, even if it's an angst, an uncomfortable feeling. You can't describe it, you can't articulate it, but at least it's some emotion. You remember Schaeffer pointed out those people who worship demons. A horrific thing to do, but at least it's better than no reality. So, Schaeffer's been saying the same thing. Ravi Zacharias is saying the same thing. When you go to Google and you research, like you did you're going to hear people saying the same thing, but we're using different terms for it. And I wanted to lessen the confusion, because you say, now we're talking about postmodernism today. Well, now we're going in a different direction. This must be different than what we saw from Ravi Zacharias and what we're seeing from him and what we saw from Francis Schaeffer. I don't think so. We're talking about the very same thing. An age in which we've cast off reason, and now we're trying to make it work. Remember, when the man proposed the circle of philosophical thought, he didn't just propose the idea. Somebody's going to try and take that. A whole group of groupies are going to follow him and try and make it work. Marx writes his manifesto, something like 50 years later. It takes that long for these avant-garde thinkers to have somebody maybe catch up and follow him. And then somebody follows him, and this is where it winds up. The Soviet people in the Soviet Union, an elitist group tried it. tried it. And they have problems making it work. The only way it can work is repression. Rousseau comes along and proposes his view. Groupies follow him. Rousseau and others, Robespierre and others, and the French Revolution comes about because they actually tried to put that philosophical framework into practice. That didn't do too well, so we cross it out and try and get another one. And the age of non-reason helped foster that revolution because there was no guideline then to find right or wrong. So they actually started thinking about tearing down the cathedrals. And they actually took a young woman and paraded her in a big parade and would have these ceremonies where reason is now our God. Well, that didn't work out too good. Because reason was extracted from and cut off from who? God, who gives reason, purpose, and definitions. Starting from man himself. Reason falls apart because man is fallible, finite, and infinite, finite, and therefore changeable. He's not immutable. So he functions relatively. That is, you can't count on us. We may think differently tomorrow. So humanism brings that, evolution brings that, and relativism is the result. Okay? Then, coming off of this, we had a period of time, about 100 years ago, called modernism. Modernism. More complicated than I'm describing this, absolutely. Just like postmodernism is much more complicated as you try to do your research. And I'm very much simplifying it when I say that modernism is there's no right or wrong, no absolutes, and you decide what you want to believe. Okay. A notion that only science could explain reality. Came to a point where God is dead and the Bible isn't the answer, theology and religion isn't the answer, actually philosophy is not the answer. Only science. In Schaeffer's presentation, it's the workings of the Industrial Revolution and the Science Age. We're going to figure this out. Thus the elite, because they're the people who understand the science world. The average person doesn't have the training in this and the education for it. So we're going to look to people like the elite who are going to lead us to purpose and reason. Turning to evolution as a part of the science world, then Hitler is going to try and use the theory and work it out. Hitler's favorite philosopher was Nietzsche. Nietzsche was an evolutionist. So Hitler comes to this conclusion that man is evolving and I can help him evolve by doing two things. Killing off the bottom of the breeding stock and enhancing the top. He actually believed he could speed up the process of evolution. So he was bringing in the Nordic women to breed with Aryan race so he could create, what did he call it? A super race. All he was trying to do, he believed evolution is true. Now scientifically, he's going to work to bring it about. Who were people on the bottom of the DNA chain?
People with affections,
Blacks?
gypsies, blacks.
Yeah. The Jews he considered to be less than human. So now listen, you have to understand this, in the context of how he was thinking, he actually thought it was a good thing to kill the base DNA people. You say, boy, that's turning goodness and badness upside down, isn't it? Absolutely, yes. Yes, it was. Because meaning and purpose, as far as good, lost. So he and his men were convinced. They were helping. I think Hitler actually makes this statement someplace. He's actually helping. He doesn't believe in God. But he's actually helping God in the sense that he's helping the system create the super race. Now this isn't God. I would use a small g on that, wouldn't you? And what is it? It's satanic. So we aren't surprised that Hitler and others were into occultic things. It was a worldview, and it was out to destroy everything that opposed it. Certainly Christianity and Judaism, which believed what? That there are absolutes by which you could measure him and say that he was wrong. You say, why didn't the majority of the Lutheran Church battle him? Because by that time, 400 years after the Reformation, the Lutheran Church leadership is where? Same place, philosophically. Some weren't, very few weren't. Okay. The people who understood this realized they weren't just battling some maniac from Germany who was trying to take over the world. They were working against a philosophical system. And the reason it was so abhorrent to us is because at its very core, it went against our very core. Now today, people are doing just as evil. I pointed this out to you, what, last week? 55, I think it's 55 million now, or 50 million babies have been aborted in the United States. That wouldn't have seen the light of day 60, 70 years ago. Why? Because it would have caused such tension with our philosophical understanding of right and wrong and the value of man. And that's why it didn't happen back there. Today it can happen. Why? Because we're thinking philosophically the same way Hitler did. Because we are evolutionarily relativistic humanists. While we think we defeated Hitler, truth is Satan lives not everywhere like God does omnipresent, but he sure can move around, and his worldview is being adopted everywhere. I think preparing us for a time when the whole world will be allowed to demonstrate that worldview. And what will they do? Martyrdom of Jews and Christians. Why? Because they represent the opposite of worldview. I don't think I'm going to be here at that point. Not just because I'm going to die before it happens, but because I think the church is taken out. I believe in the rapture. Okay, 1900 or 100 years ago, so the word modernism confuses people today when you talk about it because they think it's what? Modern current thinking. It's not modern current thinking. It has been replaced. Okay, postmodernism is post after modernism. It really is simply an extension of, hey, we're trying to find truth, but we can't find truth from God, liberalism, modernism. Maybe we can find truth from science and reason. Word modernism throws people off. Today it's considered as yesterday's way of thinking because it's replaced a continuing evolution of this thought to postmodernism, where it becomes the dominant world thinking today. And we'll take more time to look at this, but I don't want to skew or intimidate your reports. Okay, I want you to freely give them and turn them in and see what you got. If you try and Google modernism, you can read a whole page of modernism and never come to anybody saying, I looked at a few, just anybody saying modernism is there's no reality and no absolute truth. But you go to many of them, especially Christian ones, and that's the conclusion. One person, I think this one I'm going to hand out, simply says, oversimplified modernism is there is no absolute truth. Once you erase God, there's nothing that can give us absolute truth. Even evolution can't give us absolute truth. Okay. Because we're never really sure that evolution, which created all this, won't destroy us in the end. Okay. Evolution tried DNA by chance, and we're all doing pretty well. But how do we know that at some point the DNA will turn on us and kill us all? We don't. We don't. Okay. Questions? Comments? Maybe I struggle so hard in trying to define this because I'm older than you. And so I have much more history coming from a world that lived in black and white and the real world of absolutes. And you haven't lived that long to have that past experience, and your whole world is this quicksand of never being able to stand on anything rock, except your Christian faith. So you can understand it, I think, but we old people have a tremendous challenge just trying to understand what it would be like to be living in a postmodern world. As I said, this one philosopher said, there is no such thing as people living in a postmodern world because you can't live there. They have to live in the real world. I think I understand what he's saying, but in influence, philosophy and religion, speculative sciences, we really are living in a postmodern mindset. Okay, reports. Who would like to go first? Joel got his hand up. Madison? We have 6 or 7 of them today? Okay. Now remember, don't hold back. If somebody repeats what you're going to say it. You did your own work. Be happy with it, confident in it, and try and help us understand some more things about postmodernism or relativism, okay? Or the age of, 3 interchangeable, I'm going to put it up on the screen later, 3 interchangeable words. The age of non-reason. Okay, so, all right. Joel? I had my hearing aids in. Had a pretty nice rest. I'm ready. There you go.
Okay, so I'm talking about postmodernism today, as everybody else is. Postmodernism is a belief that has come about recently in the modern world and is very popular among young people. The definition of postmodernism is a worldview that believes that there is no absolute truth in the world. The foundation that postmodernism believes in is that there is no God and ultimately no foundation. Postmodernists say that their interpretation of truth and morality is truth for them, and even though they don't believe in truth. Postmodernists believe that people do not know where they are or who they are in the world today. This is basically saying that people don't have a clue of what they are or how they are to live. This belief rejects Christianity and all other religions in the world today, but is in itself a religion. It is a religion because it unites people in a common belief that they cannot know anything. While they deny it as a religion, it is really a religion that they have made up to counter Christianity. To Christians, this would seem a problem, but it apparently does not bother postmodernists that they don't know anything. One could counter this statement that people don't know anything by saying, well, how do you know that your statement is true if you don't know anything? As you can see, the definition of postmodernism completely destroys itself. In fact, all other religions and worldviews that exist today completely destroy themselves because they do not start with God, and the Bible is their foundation. Christianity is the only religion in the world that believes that the Bible is the ultimate authority and standard of truth and morality, and this is what makes Christianity different from all other religions. Postmodernism rejects the authority of God's Word, because God's Word is absolute truth, and postmodernists do not believe in absolute truth. Postmodernists believe that truth is whatever they want it to be at any given time. They also believe that morality is not absolute and is whatever they want it to be also. This is a problem because people's idea of truth and morality will clash with other people's ideas of truth and morality. Then these people will disagree with each other and will want their own view to be made the correct one. This is against the view of postmodernism and shows that postmodernism cannot answer the questions that people have today and should not be the standard that we implement in our government. Like, for example, if the United States totally followed postmodernism and projected this view to its final conclusion, our country would destroy itself, and it is in the process of doing that. Since postmodernists do not believe in any absolute or absolute morality, they do not believe that people should live under any system of law. If people did not live under any system of law, then people could do whatever they wanted, even if it included killing and stealing. While postmodernists may disagree with this, this is what would happen if their view were projected to its final conclusion. According to true postmodernist view, Christians should be able to live and worship God however they want to, because there should not be any laws that contradict what people believe. However, postmodernists are some of the Christians' greatest enemies because they try to prevent us the freedom to worship God and share the gospel with others. Postmodernism is a belief that was formed because of people who try to do anything they can to reject God. They reject the Bible's authority and ultimately come up with no authority. However, they are satisfied with Postmodernism because it completely rejects Christianity, and that has always been their goal. They are now left with nothing to believe in and nothing to place their trust in. The Bible is the only book that will solve their lack of belief, and this is only through the working of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit draws people to God, and if they respond and place their trust in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, only then can they really know truth. Jesus said that He is truth, and the only way to know truth is to come to Him. Postmodernists need to really look closely at their worldview and realize that it does not make any sense. They need to look to the Bible for an answer to their problems and realize that the only way to find truth is to start with God's Word.
Good report, Joel. Here's what we're going to do today. Usually I comment on your presentation, but because you're all doing it on the same subject, I'll refrain on that and just make notes and get some things at the end. Okay, who is next? Madison?
Okay, can I sit down? Is that okay?
Sure, Ken.
Okay. The definition of postmodernism is a late 20th century style and concept in arts, architecture, and criticism that represents a departure from the modernism and has at its heart a general distrust of grand theories and ideologies, as well as a problematical relationship with any notion of art. So, first of all, whoa, what? So, I kind of wrote that down just for, I think, academic sake, to give you guys a definition. But if any of you got that, yay. But it's pretty much saying that there's no absolute truth, as Pastor Don pointed out this morning. According to Google.com, that's where that was from, by the way. Postmodernism was a movement. Postmodernism was a movement in architecture that rejected the modernist, avant-garde passion for the new. Postmodernism is often viewed as a culture of quotations. Take Matt Groening's The Simpsons. The very structure of the television show quotes the classic era of the family sitcom, while the misadventures of its cartoon characters ridicule all forms of institutionalized authority. So it's pretty much like a play on play. There's no absolute truth, since the show is just more like, hey, we can do whatever we want, the government's going to be like, all right. So its cartoon characters ridicule all forms of institutionalized authority, patriarchal, political, religious, and so on. And it does so by endlessly quoting from other media texts and kind of making fun of everything. TheConversation.com. Postmodernism in itself is a culture that has overtook the mindset of people in today's day and age. This mindset has dominated, or at least has leaked into many of the thinking of people groups today. Postmodernism is highly skeptical of explanations which claim to be valid for all cultures, groups, traditions, or races, and instead focuses on the relative truth of each person. PBS.org explained how postmodernism is post, because it denies the existence of any ultimate principles, and it lacks the optimism of there being a scientific, political, philosophical, or religious truth which will explain everything for everybody. A characteristic of the so-called modern mind. The paradox of the postmodern position is that in placing all principles under the scrutiny of skepticism, it must realize that even its own principles are not beyond questioning. As the philosopher Richard Tarnas states, postmodernism cannot on its own principles ultimately justify itself any more than can the various metaphysical overviews against which the postmodern mind has defined itself. So pretty much, they don't even know what they're doing. Branches of postmodernism floats into things such as religion, art, culture, architecture, etc. One branch that can be defined by postmodernism that affects every other branch is religion, because religion is pretty much the foundation by which we state everything that flows throughout our lives. And if they don't have anything to base that on, I can't imagine what's going on in their heads. The definition of postmodernism religion, it's an actual thing, just that there's postmodern Hinduism, Judaism, neo-paganism. The postmodern religion definition is it strengthens the perspective of the individual and weakens the strength of institutions and religions that deal with objective realities. So even the religion's foundation itself has really no foundation. The idea of postmodernism is that there is no absolute truth, when in itself is an absolute truth. Examples of these religions would be postmodern Christianity, neo-paganism, postmodern Buddhism. In conclusion, a big majority of life has been affected by postmodernism. Postmodernism has itched itself through recent history through philosophers such as these names, Jean Baudrillard, Jean-Francois Lyotard, and Jacques Derrida, and Michael Foucault. Postmodernism is a way of thinking that has affected everyday life in this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you, Madison. More insights? Who is next? Okay. Go ahead.
So, postmodernism. None of you guys know anything about that, right?
No.
I know you all have been studying it, but... So, when I looked up postmodernism, I found a short synopsis which said that postmodernism arose as a departure from modernism. Well, I mean, that's very clear and straightforward, but you can get that from the name, but you still don't know exactly what postmodernism is. So I looked it up on another website, and it said, postmodernism is characterized by broad skepticism, subjectivism, or relativism, a general suspicion of reason, and an acute sensitivity to the role of ideology in asserting and maintaining a political and economic power. That's a little bit, I mean, that tells us more what it is, but it's kind of hard to understand. So what exactly is postmodernism? In its basic form, postmodernism just denies most of the main philosophical tenets which were held during the Enlightenment. First, they deny that there is an objective reality or truth which is independent of human beings. Well, is that true? I mean, as you can see from the very beginning, postmodernism is an untenable position, as the very statement that there is no truth is in itself a statement of objective truth. The second thing that postmodernism denies is that reason and logic are valid. Rather, reason and logic are merely constructs which are only valid in intellectual pursuits wherein they are used. But, I mean, the very person who tries to argue this way is using logic and reason to make their argument, even though they deny their existence. So it just doesn't work. And then postmodernism also declares there is no such thing as a basic human nature. They say all or nearly all aspects of human psychology are determined by social and cultural forces. However, that doesn't seem to be the case when we, look at human nature. I mean, all humans have a bent for doing the wrong things, and we know that. We have a conscience. We know right from wrong. This is evident when we express horror over the murder of a child, or know that it is wrong to hurt someone. There are many other ideas which postmodernism denies, including the idea that we can know anything, that language means anything, or that we can explain anything scientifically. All of these are obviously, they don't make sense, and they're all a part of the idea of relativism, which goes hand in hand with postmodernism. Since postmodernists reject the idea of objectivity, truth and reality are determined by discourses. This means that truth can vary from person to person based on their life experiences and the beliefs that have grown out of their experience. Therefore, in their view, someone could say that they think black is white, and a postmodernist would have to accept that. I could say, I think that camera is a watermelon. And a postmodernist would have to say, well, in your view, then it's a watermelon. But, so in theory, they ought to accept everyone. They have to accept everyone's beliefs. But they don't accept absolutes, which is it's self-absolute statement. So it's all mixed up. Their view doesn't hold water. When someone makes a statement that all truth is relative, they're making an objective statement. They're saying that there is no absolute truth, and that is truth. In conclusion, postmodernists live inconsistently with their beliefs, but it has spread throughout our culture as it looks to be the most tolerant. But when people take hold of postmodernism, they abandon reason. Even though they adamantly deny it, there is truth, there is reality that can be known, there are absolutes. However, they deliberately blind their eyes to these things, suppressing the knowledge of the truth, as it says in Romans. This leads to a depressing reality where nothing can be known or sure of and no meaning can be hoped for. Let us be glad that we know the one absolute, the maker of all, and that we can derive our meaning and purpose from him. Thank you.
Thank you. More insight. All right, who's next?
Postmodernism. The philosophy of postmodernism is far from being a modern thought. Like any other ism, postmodernism goes back to man's rebellion in the Garden of Eden. As Eve listened to Satan's persuasive words, she was falling prey to what can be classified as postmodern thinking. Satan was sowing seeds of doubt as to what God really said concerning the tree of life. Indeed, has God said, "You shall not eat from any tree in the garden," Satan crooned to Eve in Genesis chapter 3. At that moment, Eve began to question what the truth really was, and then she decided that she knew what was best and ate the fruit with Adam's approval. The consequences of that decision, the decision to disregard what God has said and make their own truth, plunged the world into darkness. What exactly defines postmodernism? Postmodernism is the belief that all truth is relative. What is true for you may not be true for me. To a postmodernist mind, there are no absolutes. Instead, the relative logic of the dialectical both-and system reigns. Whatever I want to be right is therefore right for me, and what you want to be right for you can be true for you at the same time. That is very convenient, until one puts into practice their belief that they have been a bird this whole time, and they try to fly off the top of a very high building. Reality will rudely kick in, and no matter how convinced they are of being able to fly, the fact is, there is not the slightest comparison between plummeting to the ground at an alarming rate, which is what will happen, and soaring gracefully above the earth. This may be a rather drastic illustration, but it shows the blatant absurdity of the postmodernist thinking. Postmodernists claim there's no absolute truth. How sure of that are they? Well, they're apparently absolutely sure there's no such thing as absolute truth. I don't know, but that sounds like a self-refuting statement to me. However, we should not be surprised at the desire of sinful humans to try and think they have total control over everything by making their own definitions of truth. This fact of humans trying to push God aside have been played out all through history. Different forms have manifested themselves through various philosophies, like humanism, naturalism, materialism, etc. The term postmodernism literally means post or after modernism, which made no sense to me until I researched it because there's never an after modern era since we are always in the modern era at present. Postmodernism simply means after the modernist era of influence, as in the philosophy of modernism. The modernist era came to fullness in the 19th and 20th centuries and was a complete break from the philosophy of Enlightenment thinking. Modernists strove to throw off what its adherents classified as old and out-of-date thinking, especially in literature and the arts. Modernism sought to rethink every area of the human experience. Its motto was well summed up in the modernist poet Ezra Pound's words, "Make it new." The era of postmodernism really got its start coming out of the 1950s. After World War I and before World War II, modernism had endeavored to make things the right way and in a uniform manner, believing social reform could take place as man was unlocking his ability to mass-produce all the new inventions that were on the market. From that time on, society became increasingly skeptical. It reached a frenzy with the social revolution of the 1960s as the youth of the Western world rebelled against everything imaginable. An increased interest in Eastern religion also shaped the culture because the postmodernist thinking went hand in hand with the relativism that is prominent in Eastern thought. The Frenchman Jean-Paul Sartre was, among many things, a writer, political activist, and philosopher. He was very influential in the arena of postmodern thought. Several of his quotes I have here, and I think these quotes well illustrate not only this lost man's personal thinking, but the fundamental flaw of postmodernism. I quote, "That God does not exist, I cannot deny. That my whole being cries out for God, I cannot forget." This is the most basic problem, the denial of God, because humans know in the depths of their souls there is a God, and trying to ignore God is devastating to a person's worldview. This next quote illustrates the humanistic philosophy that comes with putting God aside. I again quote, Man is fully responsible for his nature and his choices. Coming closely on the heels of such erroneous thinking is this desperate quote: "Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance." These quotes reveal a misery that has haunted unsaved souls throughout the millennia and is the core of postmodernist philosophy. I believe the character Marilla Cuthbert of Anne of Green Gables states it truly: "To despair is to turn your back on God." And that is what postmodernists are left with in the end: despair. Postmodernism is defined as a philosophy that is skeptical of the values and morals that have been traditional in society, particular to the belief in objective reality and absolute truth. Because postmodernism holds that knowledge and truth have been purely formed by social context, and historical and political as well, that humans have found themselves in throughout the ages. This philosophy is a dangerous threat to Christianity because it denies the very idea that we have God-given laws and morals to follow. If what we consider normal moral behavior is just a result of most humans agreeing on this or that at some distant time in the past, then to a postmodernist, there is no problem to, for example, declare marriage as a union between whomever or whatever, instead of as God has ordained it to be, that is, between a man and a woman. Postmodernism is characterized by a distinct lack of order and nobleness. It is a philosophy that feeds on fragmentation and chaos, because when projected to its final conclusion, it leads men down the road of vulgarity and lawlessness. This is aptly stated in the phrase nil admirare, or nothing to admire, as coined by Peter Gibbon when writing for the political newsletter Imprimis. When there are no absolutes and people proclaim their right to make truth for themselves, they unwittingly are proclaiming their slavery to sin, because the only thing that sinful human nature really wants is to slay the voice of conscience and reason and drown guilt and shame so they can be free to engage in whatever licentious and wanton behavior they wish. The influence of postmodernism is in every aspect of our culture. In the arts, it is glaring in the way postmodernism has dominated the style. Entertainment is dark and pessimistic, paintings are abstract, and poetry has no structure, leading some to question whether or not postmodernist poetry can really be classified as poetry at all. Toleration of everyone's views is paramount. No one is allowed to criticize anyone else's lifestyle. However, there is a curious double standard in place when it comes to Christianity. Heaven forbid anyone even talk about an inclusive faith that has a God that demands such moral living. In conclusion, postmodernism is nothing new. It is really just one more way that Satan employs to try and derail people. A new name, but still the old face of distorted truth. As Christians, we can be confident in our truth. It is not skewed humanistic truth, but the very truth revealed to us by the Creator of the universe. We can stand firm on God's absolute truth in these dark times.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, who's next? I see that hand. I see that silent hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I looked up the definition of postmodernism. Like, one of the first things I found was postmodernism, as the word implies, exactly, rather than, anyway, after the modernism time. So my first thought I started thinking about, I sort of went into like Revelations and stuff. But the way people, what postmodernism is, as we see today, is, as we were talking about earlier, what has come after the philosophy of modernism, postmodernism, which is really really into relativism and stuff very strongly. We typically would refer to what is going on today as postmodernism. This society is very similar to the I've already said that actually. They tend to believe, what may be true for you is true for me, the relativists. But the postmodernists tend to be a little bit different, whereas the relativists are going, what's true for you isn't true for me. The postmodernists look at that, well, what's not true for you, or, everything's true, I guess what you say. If you see that as true, but I don't, well, we're both true, both and. So it's acceptable no matter what it is. But interestingly enough, they have a tendency to not always apply it to science. They'll apply it to everything else, reality, spiritual things, morality, but they will not apply it to science so much, the observable things. Some of them do, but the reasoning for this, I believe, that they come to this is to unite everyone, and to so that we have peace, so that we aren't fighting over, who believes what. It is, I believe it is very much what is coming in the future. In the book of Revelations, I believe this is the next step to the world religion spoken of in Revelations. According for there to be the one world religion in the end, there is going to need to be perfect, or there's going to need to be a degree of unity that people have beforehand to unite then, where they are willing to accept the same things. And I believe that this postmodernism will lead into, I guess, true postmodernism, the next step, because of that tolerance, I guess. But because they also still, to a degree, accept the observable fact when they see the Antichrist die observably and rise again, they're going to view him as, they're going to be able to accept that as God when they see it. So, in the end, because of Antichrist, he really is a man of war, it's really not going to bring unity in the end until Christ returns and sets up his kingdom, where we will have unity and peace there forever. So, yeah, I guess that's pretty much what I had to say.
Thank you. Shane. All right. Who's next? Yes,
So I'm going to talk about utilitarianism. Just kidding. Postmodernism is the frame of mind and lifestyle of the fully liberated man who abandoned all ideologies, traditions, and shackles which may in any way have impeded his freedom of thinking and acting. Postmodernism supporters deny long-held beliefs and conventions and maintain that all viewpoints are valid. In today's society, postmodernism has led to relativism, the idea that all truth is relative. That means what is right for one group is not necessarily right or true for everyone else. The most obvious example is sexual morality. Christianity teaches that sex outside marriage is wrong, but postmodernism would claim that such a view might pertain to Christians, but not to those who don't follow Jesus Christ. Therefore, sexual morality has become much more permissive in our society in recent decades. Taken to the extremes, postmodernism argues that what society says is illegal, such as drug use or stealing, is not necessarily wrong for the individual. Scientific and technological achievements of the 20th century have gradually given rise to new ideological and religious views. Because of their increased knowledge and skills, people have gained more power. They discovered more scientific explanations for human life and natural phenomena, and in the process discovered solutions to most of their problems. Research became the key to new insights. Knowledge increased exponentially, and humanity started shaping their own world. In this new world, people occupy a central position and become masters of their own destiny. A humanistic doctrine of self-redemption emerged from this man and knowledge-oriented worldview. Since man started liberating himself from all ideologies in the modern era that impeded his freedom of thought and lifestyle, he consciously moved from the modern to the postmodern period. But to be able to do that, he had to discredit and abandon important characteristics of the modern era because they're too restrictive and prescriptive in nature. This gave rise to an extensive process of deconstruction. And just a little side note that I got put in here. Trevor is awesome, Trevor is cool, and everyone likes Trevor. The Christian religion is deconstructed for the following reasons. It leads to faith in a supreme being who has authority over people to determine the nature of their lives and also to eternally condemn them if they don't comply with divine precepts. It offers supernatural explanations to the origin of the world as well as forms of life, and these explanations are contrary to the scientific things. And findings such as the theory of evolution. It describes concepts such as heaven, hell, and life after death, which are not scientifically verifiable. It pronounces unacceptable judgments upon most people, even Christians who entertain certain views that are at variance with the Bible. It portrays a very negative image of the non-Christian religions. It enforces a set of moral norms on people which restricts their freedom of choice, including their sexual orientation, and stigmatizes those who do not comply with these norms. It discourages people to only make use of psychological methods to solve conduct, self-esteem problems, and mental disorders. It is for reasons such as these that postmodern man regards himself as post-Christian and post-theistic. Some of them completely reject Christianity and follow a secular lifestyle. Others follow the way of drastically reforming theology in order to subject it to their own views. To them, liberal churches and other religious meetings are used as forums for the further deconstruction of evangelical Christianity. These reformers reduce the Bible to the level of a humanly conceived book with contradictions. God is robbed of his power and depicted as a pantheistic God who dwells in all people and also in nature. The virgin birth of the Lord Jesus, his deity, resurrection from the dead, and his ascension are denied, as well as the redemptive value of his crucifixion. Prayer is replaced by Eastern meditation, while all forms of directive preaching from the Bible are banned and substituted by speculative discussions in which the credibility of the Bible is questioned.
All right, next.
Postmodernism, as you've been hearing all morning, is something that is quickly infiltrating the world today, in schools, universities, or just everyday life ideas that pop up on billboards and in stores and everything like that. Postmodernism is the idea that there is no real truth, and knowledge is always kind of created or invented and never discovered because it never is actually true. And so this idea allows nothing ever to be known. It is always believed because technically nothing can ever be known as a fact. That's why the belief of postmodernism isn't the fact that postmodernism is something that's always a belief or an idea. It's never a concrete thought. So this belief allows anyone to think whatever they want to think. And just a quick example, like if I was to think that stealing is okay, and I'm walking into a store and I find a pair of shoes and I just throw on the shoes that I like, and then I see a jacket and I grab the jacket and then I just start walking out and go through the doors and the sensors go off, and so when the employees comes out, it's like, hey, you can't just steal that. I'd be like, well, I think I can steal it because that's what I believe, because stealing's fine. So but then the other person, their belief that stealing isn't correct or isn't right, our beliefs would oppose each other. But one thing that postmodernism believes is that you shouldn't try to force your religion, not your religion, but your ideas that you think are correct or incorrect upon someone else, because that way you'd have power over that person. And in postmodernism world, we're all kind of on the same level, thinking and believing whatever we want to believe. So like, one thing I know, like when I was working at the village, all my coworkers out there, they drank and they smoked and kind of lived a very immoral lifestyle. And you know, I'd ask them, you know, they'd be kind of bragging and about how much they drank last night, or how high they got the other night before, or something like that. You know, so I'd ask them, you know, why do you smoke, or why do you drink? And many times the answers would be, you know, oh, it makes me feel good, or oh, I've been doing it since I was 12, or something like that. And, you know, we'd start a conversation, and I would try to gear that conversation towards, you know, witnessing to them, bringing up, you know, hey, do you know where you're going to go if you die or something like that, if you overdose, or if you get drunk one night and a car hits you or something like that, you know, and they kind of get a little uneasy, and then if I, you know, if I mentioned, oh, do you think you go to heaven, or do you think you go to hell, almost like immediately, without fail, like they'd kind of just kind of interrupt me and say, oh, well, to each his own, to each his own, each man, you guys can, I like what I'm doing, but if you don't like what you're doing, you just don't do it. And it's just like that postmodernism thinking of, I'll do whatever I want to do, and you do whatever you want to do. Don't try to make me do something different, and I won't try to make you do something different. So they knew I was a Christian, and you know, they might joke around saying that I should smoke weed or drink, and I'd just be like, no, I'm not going to do any of that stuff. And so they're like, so they just completely didn't want to hear about anything. They'd change the subject and talk about skiing or something like that. So, so like many times, whether you're witnessing, and you know, as a Christian, I've gone door to door and like passed out tracts and asked people, you know, are you saved? And sometimes even when they first hear that I'm with a church, they'll just kind of like, you know, start shutting the door, not interested, and just shut the door in my face. And you're like, okay, well, there goes that person I could have talked to. But when you think about it, like when they shut down those conversations, and then you may think that they're rejecting you. They're not really rejecting you. They're ultimately rejecting God, because with postmodernism thinking, they completely erase God from the whole picture. And that way, they don't have that conscience as like we do and as I do. When we do something wrong, we know that there's a biblical truth that says, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Either the 10 Commandments or all through the Bible, there's verses that say you should or shouldn't do something. And so, you know, in this postmodernism world today, there'll be people that constantly are shoving you aside, rejecting you, not wanting to hear what you have to say. But and even they might be trying to push their beliefs on you. But if you just keep focusing on Christ and keep doing our jobs as Christians, and spreading the gospel, that's our job here on earth. And if you plant the seed, God can take the seed and grow it, and He can do many mighty things with what you do just here on earth.
Was there someone else? I think there were 7, is that correct?
No,
7. All right. I'm impressed. I am impressed. A lot of stuff there, and you guys presented a lot more stuff. Let's review a little bit of this, and we'll take our break. This is not necessarily in the order of importance, but things I jotted down as I was listening to your reports. If they applied it consistently, they would have to allow us an equal tolerance for our view, wouldn't they? Okay, they don't. So what is that the evidence of? Suppression of truth. Okay, it actually becomes an evidence of suppression of truth. If you mix utilitarianism, which in a sense it really becomes, utilitarianism, whatever is good for the common good. You could kill a lot of humans for the sake of the benefit of the whole. So if we found we were overpopulated, it would be then right, not wrong, to kill off human beings, let them die, for the sake of, for example, planet Earth, or for the sake of the rest of us, the whole. That stands out to me. Why? Here's a question I've asked myself, and I think we need to pursue not just the report of what it is, but where's it going? What's the next phase on this making of circles? And why is it so appealing? And some of you mentioned this. One of you especially worked on this. Why is it so appealing? I think you touched on this. At least you hinted that. Do you think the average millennial today, the average young person today, do you think he has really thought through all these isms and decided, we can't find meaning and purpose, so I'm going to try non-meaning? I don't think so. The thinkers maybe developed these concepts, but in general, why is it so appealing to people? And one of you touched on that, or more than one of you. It's convenient. That was the word I heard. It's not only convenient, it fits the idea of I can do anything I want to do. Okay? And if I want to be able to not be judged and do anything I want, I have to repeat back to you, what did they say to you? Do whatever you want, you can have your own view. But when you start presenting your view, which is in contrast to their philosophical form, they can't accept that and have to push it away. Okay? Everything winds up being true. Somebody made that statement, and that really caught my attention. If nothing is true, then everything winds up being true. And we're going to hear that from Ravi a little bit more. It isn't just that everything is possible. Now, anything is possible. Anything is possible. It opens the door completely to not just everything, but anything. All right? The purpose of tolerance. What is the purpose of tolerance? I can see it. I look at the purpose of where it's going. I personally can see that it could really set up the Antichrist kingdom. I really think it could. Now, will there be another phase or another world classic, some kind of classic reconditioning of postmodernism into something else like virtual reality, or can it go to something else? I suppose so. But it really could set up the Antichrist kingdom, because the Antichrist will propose that he has become God. A man has actually now become God, and you can become God too. And so now you can project virtually what you want to be true and join him in that. And this whole idea that the millennial, characteristic of the millennial group today in the world is that they all group together and they want to believe the same thing. And that I find pretty interesting and fascinating. You really hit some really neat thoughts here. How do you apologetically respond to this? You know, it's interesting, one of you took it into the area of prophecy, one of you took it to the area of witnessing. I was fascinated by that. How do you take an objective truth, which is what the gospel is? If this thinking is foreign to us, how foreign is our thinking to them now? Does that make sense? It is. So how do we take the objective truth of the gospel to them? And I think that's something we really have to ask ourselves. Why is it so popular? Again, because I think it just lets them do whatever they want, to live any way they want. It's a glandular, one of you mentioned the sexual context, it's a glandular thing, my own personal desires, whether it's a thirst for getting high or having pleasure, hedonism, and all these isms seem to come, since postmodernism says, hey, baby, do whatever turns you on. Now all of the isms become pronounced. Does that make sense to you? You can do anything you want. Now all the isms are potentially okay. And they're all pronounced good, all the isms. So now you just pick your own, choose your own in that process. Pretty fascinating. Let me hand this out and we'll take our break. Catch these before you go. This is from, I said charm, that's my dyslexia, I think. It's CARM, Christian Apologetics Research Ministry. This was done by Matt Slick. I think you're going to like this. Put this in your notes. And we'll take a break and come back in about 10 minutes. Good reports. Good reports. Y'all have one? Yeah, for everybody?
There's going to be extra.
Okay, there, we need two here.
That's right.
Here, there's hope I'm putting on
You got it.
You know what, Pastor Don?
Yeah.
For, oh, hey,